Hey, thanks for tuning in. My name is Scarlett, and I am the founder of Women's March San Diego at UCSD. To kickstart our podcast series, I wanted to discuss something that a lot of us women and men are sometimes ashamed to talk about in public, which is sexual assault and harassment. I have brought in Jinho as my co-host to talk with me about this topic. For our guest speaker, I couldn't think of a better person. She is a defender of gender equity and health based in San Diego, who collaborates with different organizations globally. Dr. Anita Raj. My name is Scarlett Lopez. I am the founder of Women's March here at UCSD. I'm here with my interim president, Jinho Jung, and Anita Raj, who is a professor at UCSD.
Hi, yes, I'm a professor at UC San Diego. I am professor of medicine. I'm professor of education studies. I am fortunate enough to have a Tata Chancellor Endowed Chair on Society and Health. And I'm very proudly the director of the Center on Gender Equity and Health. And very excited to speak with all of you today about the role of women's leadership and what COVID-19 has done for women's positioning and for how women's leadership has helped build back some of the negative impacts of the pandemic.
Thank you so much for being here with us, Dr. Raj. We have known Me Too has been brought up through social media and everywhere, but surprisingly enough, it continues, and even more so now during the pandemic. How is the pandemic, now that everyone is inside and there's not a lot of people outside, how is it still continuing even more so now?
So a lot of what people discuss about Me Too would be things that include both what happens in public spaces and what happens in private spaces, the kind of sexual harassment that you might face in public forums. Well, that has been more limited in many ways because we aren't in public forums as much. However, we are now in increasing isolation in private circumstances. And in those private circumstances, the vulnerability that in particular women and girls face for violence against people, violence from people they know, their partners, potentially family members, neighbors, that seems to have gone up. And it's particularly been the case, we feel, in the situation of partner violence, domestic violence, where it's violence coming from partners. And there's a few reasons for that. Number one, certainly the isolation, the opportunity and the vulnerability for someone who's been isolated is all the greater. The stressors of the pandemic. So not only are you vulnerable to violence occurring, but the stressors that can heighten agitation in households that can result in violence are all the greater. And people are less likely to call in services because in certain circumstances, because entry into the home to provide protection can also be entry into the home with the virus. And we're definitely turning the corner on the pandemic. We are not seeing sort of the levels of increases, and we actually are seeing declines in some places. But that doesn't mean that people aren't continuing to try to be safe. And that doesn't mean that the stressors that are resulting, the financial stressors, the social stressors, the isolation, aren't persisting in ways that are keeping those who have been affected by violence increasingly vulnerable.
I know that some people feel like it doesn't apply to them because they it's their partner, so they say that's my husband and it's supposed to happen. I don't believe this is actually true, correct?
Yeah, there's, so I work a lot in public health, but also, have worked a lot with social services. There are behaviors that occur in households, in communities, that are harmful. And we are not supportive of harms and impacts of harms. And When there is abuse, and sometimes that can be emotional abuse, it won't leave the scar, but it's still there. That is not something that has to happen in the course of a relationship. And I think we need to do a lot more in building awareness, particularly if people have come from families where that has been normalized. We need to build awareness that actually there's a lot of demonstrations of what makes a healthy relationship. A healthy relationship is, it's about trust, it's about safety, it's about respect, it's about not feeling that you are under the control of the other person. And if these are the issues that you are feeling in your relationship, we just ask you to sort of take a step back and learn a little bit more. There's lots of wonderful resources. There's an organization known as CCS here in San Diego that can provide you with resources. CCS.org. You can get online and understand what are the aspects of what is an unhealthy or potentially an abusive relationship, and what are aspects that are healthy, and where do you fall, because you have the right and you should have a relationship that brings out the best in you, where you get to bring out the best in the person that you're with, and where you're happy and supported by each other and trust and respect each other.
Yeah, definitely trust and respect is a major issue going on, that a lot of people feel that it's just because they're there that they should endure the disrespect, and they don't know that they're being disrespected. So how can we educate people more on that and like denormalize what has been normalized through a lot of years? I know that there's been a lot of cultures where it's like women you just stay at home and that's what you do, and you just take care of the husband, and that's all you have to do, kids and husband. Is there any way to denormalize these cultural ideas that were from the past that we can help people now?
Yeah, so a lot of times people are so, this is my culture, this is what it is. And I think the thing about culture is there's just very beautiful and wonderful aspects of each of our cultures. We know with great diversity, we have great representation of beauties that come from each culture that's part of our lives. But that doesn't mean that every aspect of your culture or your history is what is best for you or your family. And I think it's really important that, or your community, right? And I think it's really important to reflect on how we can take what are wonderful elements of our culture and how we can seek to potentially alter those elements of our culture that may continue to be in our lives that are harmful to us, or if not harmful, holding us back. I remind everyone there was a time where women couldn't get an education. UCSD is fortunately far too new to have ever excluded people based on sex or other types of social characteristics. Thank goodness. And certainly we're adamantly opposed to that today, both legally and just socially and emotionally. But we have to remember that we reside in a culture where that was acceptable. And so, the idea of culture change, we don't have to alter all aspects of the culture, but to critically think about what brings us value and we can build our strengths upon, and what creates harms and we can alter in our lives, in our families, in our communities to reduce or eliminate those harms. That is what we should be spending our time thinking about. I'll give you an example from my own life. So my grandparents, on my father's side and my mother's side, my grandmothers both married as minors. They were, one grandmother was 13 and the other grandmother was 15, and they both married men over the age of 18. And today, there are some people who discuss this issue and are like, that's pedophilia. And it's like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but you're also calling my grandfather a pedophile, and that's not very comfortable to me. And so recognizing that at that time, I think that there were enormous vulnerabilities both my grandmothers faced one at 13 marrying someone 18, one at 15 marrying someone 25. I hope I got those ages right. That, there were vulnerabilities. I cannot deny that was, that absolutely was the case. And at the same time, they were able to build a good marriage, a good family, a good life. That doesn't mean those harms didn't exist. So when my mother and father got married, they were well into their 20s. And when I got married, I was well into my 20s, and I married someone who was just over 30. And my niece just got married, and she's the next generation, and she's 31. So they, and my daughter, who's about 21 now, is like, oh no, I'm getting married at 31. So there's aspects of culture change that are really about choice as well. You can make that choice and choice in the time in which you live. And that choice needs to be choices that help support you, not just to be safe, but to provide you with opportunities. For me, for my niece, for my daughter, like, we were like, well, we're finishing school first, and school wasn't even available at a certain point for my grandmothers. And so part of it's culture, part of it's time, part of it's personal choice, and part of it's just, feeling that you can support the progress that you want, and the progress and the safety that you want for yourself, your family, your community.
I agree. I agree in the importance of school. I myself am a first generation, and I know that culturally, my mom wanted to get her education, and back then it was a lot of women stay at home. So I definitely agree on the importance, because it gave me more of a voice, educating myself about other things as well. But I do know that a lot of students do face some sexual assault and harassment on campus. I myself will share a story that it happened to me, and when I went to seek help on campus, it wasn't at UCSD, it was at a different campus. And the person who was quote unquote helping me told me, why did you put yourself in that situation? And for the longest time, I thought that it was my fault. So then I decided to deny that it happened. But my question to you is, how can we help those people that are being turned away or feel like they're not being heard? Since, seeking help is already a big step and it's a hard one. How can we actually go forward and move on helping and raising their voices?
Mm-hmm. Well, I have very strong feelings about this. Look, if people want to go through a legal process, they need to be supported to go through a legal process. And in that legal process, then there will be a need for proof or explanation. And that is going to be part of the experience of that process. At the same time, I feel very strongly that if someone discloses to you, when anyone discloses to me, I believe them. I simply believe them. We're not talking about the person who did this. We're not talking about what we're going to do with the person who did this. At this moment, there is someone who is expressing an experience where they have felt harmed, damaged, violated. And my place is simply to believe them. And I think that's one of the most important things that we can do as people talk to us, because most people don't tell anybody. I also want to highlight something else, Scarlett, but since you brought up the fact that you're a first generation student, and that, for your parents, many times in the case of first generation students, and not female first generation students, and not just first generation students, sometimes it's even that first generation to go away to college rather than live at home. These are the fears your parents have, right? And so there you are, you have an experience, and you are so scared to tell because it could wipe away your educational opportunity, as your family wants to keep you safe, which is completely understandable. And at the same time, there you are on campus with someone who did this to you. And now you don't know who might do it and who might not, and you don't have faith. And how do you focus on your education? How do you focus on your learning when you don't feel safe, frankly, in your own home? Because our campus should be your home. I think it's incredibly important that, one, we believe. Two, there's not a questioning. I don't know what happened with the services that you were provided. It doesn't make any sense to me. If you were comfortable, I definitely would let people know at that university that this occurred. You can do it anonymously. I think it's important because people can only improve if they understand when they potentially inadvertently did something that harmed somebody. But my goodness, compassion and kindness. I'm in a very strong place of recognizing, we as an academic institution, we're here to teach you. We're here to foster an environment of learning. We're here to learn from you. But none of that can happen in an environment where you don't feel safe. And I think it's incredibly important for both, if you will, for the students and the faculty to have a sense of compassion and kindness. When we make mistakes as faculty, please let us know and give us second chances. As administrations, please let us know and give us second chances, because we want to do the right thing. And this is not always clear to us. But I think that at a minimum, everybody who chooses to come forward, we need to ensure that they are believed and they are supported. And there are support services on campus. It is hard to talk to people. It's hard to tell people. We need to believe you, we need to support you, and we need to help you continue to have your education come first and foremost. It's not to negate what happened, but at the end of the day, what we want you to have the best quality education we can give you. And we don't want these kind of experiences to take that away from you.
Thank you. So I know that there's some services. Can you elaborate what other services for students that are hearing on campus right now?
Yeah. There's I think the best thing is for me to make sure and put all the right names, because sometimes the names change. But there are services. There's mental health support services, which are distinct from the services around campus sexual assault. I do want to recognize, and I'm so appreciative that you talked about sexual harassment and assault, because so many times our students don't necessarily negate the experiences of harassment, but harassment can feel extremely physically threatening, even if there was no physical contact. So just to encourage people to use the services that they feel best. I will say that, Scarlett, one of the things that, when you so beautifully and generously shared your story, one of the biggest things that happens is students leave the school or they drop out. Mm-hmm. And that is that is so painful to me. And as you shared your story as being the first generation college student, I was like, thank God you had the strength and resilience, because you're like, we can't lose you. Right. And I think that I hope that it's coming across with us that, my gosh, there's so many of us on this campus and across higher education. We don't want to lose our students. We don't want you harmed. We don't want to turn a blind eye. And sometimes these systems are really hard to navigate for us too.
Seeing as how still a person was still a victim of this, we need more women to be advocates about this. And seeing you also going through college and getting education, using that as a tool and something for you to advocate for all women and even men, because I know men also are victims of sexual assault or harassment. How can us women in leadership help? How can a woman be an advocate? Can you give us your story on how you ended up being in this career, in this path, and how women in leadership have impacted and helped these victims?
So my leadership is not as much, directly tied to services. It's more in research. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the nature of the leadership, my leadership path. And I think it will, even among students, will resonate because, of course, that path begins pretty early in your life. I also want to highlight, I'm so glad you mentioned that this can happen to men. I also want to mention that we know that these kinds of, many of these forms of violence can disproportionately affect our gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, non-binary populations and of students, and that their voices can also be crushed because you now not only have the stigma attached to these kinds of violations, but also attached to homophobia and transphobia. And so bringing your voice forward, we so respect that because we know it can be very, very difficult. Okay, so my story starts at a place that most of our UCSD students have not come from, which is Jackson, Mississippi. I was yes, a foreign land, Jackson, Mississippi. There are more Indians. I'm of Indian heritage. There are far more Indians on this campus than there are Jackson, Mississippi natives. So my story begins in Jackson, Mississippi. I was born in 1970. I was born during the Civil Rights Movement. My father taught an historically Black university. I came from a traditional Indian family. I lived in a rather traditional environment, but I was the first child born. I have an older brother and sister both born in India. I was the first child born in the US. The first of the family. My father was the first of his family to emigrate to the US. And so I was the first of our extended family to be born here. And I grew up with my parents saying, she's the only one who could be president. And I thought, I don't know, maybe I'd like to be president. I'll have to think about it. And the notion of being brought up, and Scarlett, I cannot help but think this is a story that may resonate with you. The notion of being brought up surrounded by people who thought I could do anything, that just didn't look at, and granted, this was my family, they didn't look at the color of my skin. They didn't look at the fact that I was female. They were like, she's amazing and can do everything. And what an enormously fortunate foundation that is, because when it's something that I recognize and I never take for granted. And I'm a firm believer in supporting children, from birth to early childhood for that reason. I think that, there's a lot of strength and resiliency that forms that foundation as an important time. So, meanwhile, did I experience sexism and racism? And did I have my own experiences in high school? Not so much in high school. And sexism, racism in high school, elementary school, absolutely. Sexual harassment, more abusive sort of circumstances in college and grad school. All of that held true for me. But I absolutely think it was just having parents who just had this absolute faith in me, and family. I'm the youngest in the family, and so I just had this family that was just enormously supportive. And so one of the things I think is really important is in the lives of people who want to pursue leadership. It's not if it's not your family, that's okay. Surround yourself with people who believe in you. You really work hard to build your life. And that's one of the reasons, that's a huge part of being in a healthy relationship, is bringing out the best in each other is about believing in each other. So surround yourself with the people who believe in you. And then quite frankly, I had no idea that it's not that I didn't experience, sexism, racism, harassment. It's not, but I once said this to people, I just kind of moved it, just, okay, that happened, I have to move through it. That happened, I have to move through it. And I didn't if you count, I think most of them would say this, if you count the number of times you're sexually harassed, no one does that, because it just happened too often. It's just happened too much. And so to a great extent, you're just kind of batting it off so it doesn't hold you back as much as you can until something very severe happens. And I think for me, I think, there were various points of hitting a wall, but I think one of the major points of hitting a wall, there was a point in my career where it was very clear that I wasn't advancing, and it didn't make sense to me. And I wasn't being paid fairly, and I wasn't getting equal opportunity for positioning, and everything on paper was there and actually was stronger than some of the people who were out able to out advance me. And initially I had kids and I was like, well, maybe it's just that I'm not doing enough. But then the kids got a little older and I looked at my paper, you get, because we keep our CVs, we see what everybody has. And I'm like, wait a minute.
Excuse me.
I think there's a bit of discrimination happening in this moment. And I have to tell you, I left the institution. And that was scary, and I would say rather brave of me. And I think this is true of the people who choose to leave circumstances or people in their lives in the same way. Like, it's not that it was horrible. It was just I couldn't go to the next level in an environment where I don't know if they didn't believe in me or what. I don't know what the problem was. And I found an environment where they would. And I came to UC San Diego. And I'm not trying to say that that's going to be everybody's experience here. I mean, different places work for different people, but here it was just like this faith. And then I had women. I've had wonderful mentors. One of my greatest mentors is a man. And I would say, grab your mentors where you can. It doesn't matter. You don't have to have a woman mentor. But I did have a woman mentor here, and I'll mention her by name since people might know her, Stephanie Strathdy. And she was a leader, and she gave me some guidance and some pointers and would toss my name up in various important places. And I think I was given the opportunity to build my reputation and visibility. And we created a center, and I worked my butt off. And now our center, we collaborate with UN Women. We collaborate with the World Bank. We collaborate, we collaborate with ministries of health across nations. We collaborate with certainly universities from all over the world. And we are truly a world-class center. And we are largely women run. And I think it really was just having a little bit of space and a little support to be like, and honestly, it was the space and support was just basically like, let them go. Let them go. Let's see what they can do. And I guess that's how I feel about my career. Is I feel like I continue to advance, and my goal in supporting the next generation is, I'm here with a safety net, but I'm letting you go. Let's see what you can do. And man, they surprise me every day. Every day. It is beautiful to watch the next generation, your generation. I can't do the things they do. They do all this coding, machine learning. I don't understand it. And it's beautiful. And now, they're two of my doctoral students. They produced machine learning reports on the COVID impacts in multiple countries on both reproductive care and reproductive health needs was one, and the other was misogyny online. That online misogyny was increasing, and I got to tell you, like, that's the genius that is the students here. So yeah, like, my God, what are you doing standing in the way of a woman or anybody? When you discriminate, you lose the potential for something amazing to happen.
Yeah. I'm glad you had a mentor that actually helped you. And, a lot of people just need a little bit of belief and support, and then so that they can be able to run with it. But it's very hard when someone puts an obstacle on you and you feel like everyone is better than you just because they have some sort of other benefit that you don't, that it's not necessarily something that you don't have. Like, you were qualified, but just because you weren't a man or like a certain race, you were being held back, which was very unfair. And I'm actually very proud of you for doing the scary thing and leaving everything back and saying, you know what, I deserve better. I am better, and I will do better by me. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you, Scarlett. I'm so proud of you that you went to college and you were the first one to go to college. I'm telling you, my father did this, and now the family is full of not just college graduates, people with all kinds of graduate degrees.
Yeah. It was scary, but I enjoy education, and I really love to learn. So I decided to just stick through it, even though something horrible happened to me. I just kept on going. I mean, that's the only way you move forward.
Thank you, because now we get all the gifts you're going to create.
Hopefully.
Definitely. And Jinho, we're not talking to you as much, but you as well. Our students, they're amazing.
Jinho has been a big help in helping me with this Women's March and creating this podcast, and being my support and being able to contact you. So Jinho, thank you as well.
I mean, I'm learning a lot, as I said. Like, one of the interesting things that came up was that as a male, it's kind of shameful to admit, but we kind of joke that there are false accusations out there. But I realize actually men are more prone to sexual harassment than sexual assault, which is really shocking because that's kind of counterintuitive to me. And like just looking at different works from you and all these things, discussing with Scarlett how to produce this podcast, like I learned a lot that I am really at a relative privilege among the people that are in the community.
Well, and honestly, the male voices are so important. Male voices are so important for other males to hear that kind of statement and what really constitutes sexual harassment or assault and why it's not funny.
Yes. Can you also tell us more globally your work and how you've expanded like all the way through like Russia, India, and everywhere? You say you came from a little like away from Pennsylvania and now UCSD, and then you just got your own little space. How did you end up expanding and being able to help women globally?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So my very first international project was actually in Russia with this male mentor who, and I was pregnant at the time we were writing the grant, but like, I have to say, I just adore, I'll mention his name too, Jeffrey Samet. I just adore him because it was, he just constantly validated my capacities. And at the same time, recognized that I had family responsibilities and was always so supportive of figuring out with me how I could do the work internationally while still maintaining my family responsibilities. And that was such a gift, because what that allowed me to do is understand that that was even possible, right? So I'm of Indian heritage, and I then had the opportunity to start working in India. And oh my goodness, it's my family. It's my heart is there. I've been not stuck in San Diego. It's beautiful here, but I've not been able to travel to all the field sites and all the places, to see all my colleagues in different countries. And I miss India most of all. And I'm not going to lie to you. I'd love to say that, I miss the people and I miss the food. I miss the food so much. I'm desperately, I just want a real Indian meal in India. So how do I do it? You do it with collaborators. You do it with wonderful, wonderful colleagues from around the world. I think one of the mistakes that people make, and sometimes you may have heard some of these mistakes made by political leaders, is that, these countries, whatever kind of countries, they're terrible places. Oh my gosh. We work all over the world, and we just get to work with these scientists who are brilliant. And so just like working with the students, like you just get to learn all the time. My father, who sadly passed away, as you know, not very long ago, he would always say, what other profession pays you to learn all the time? And that's definitely how I feel. So it can only be done through collaboration. It can only be done, in the same way we talked about healthy relationships, with healthy relationships of collaboration. We work really hard, and it I think comes naturally to us because we're just, our nature within the center, the people that are faculty within the center kind of operate this way. Historically, research collaborations with low and middle income countries relative to like North America or Western Europe, it was very colonial in nature because many of these places we work with were former colonies. But we really strive to kind of think about how to make this work in a way that doesn't, some people use the term decolonializing. I don't know if we fully achieved decolonializing. It's quite an entrenched structure, but we work very hard in a way that like it is truly collaboration. I mean, we're all equal scientists, and some of us have different capacities. So like we have entree to get a certain funding that my collaborators at IIPS, which is the International Institute for Population Sciences, they do demography in India, but they have the expertise in demography and then the on-the-ground capacities to be able to collect the data that we want to be able to analyze. But as far as the scientific capacities of like asking the data the questions, what kind of data do we want to collect, equal ground, everybody is an equal collaborator, and that makes it possible to work in multiple countries. Is just wonderful collaborators, wonderful relationships, getting to eat the food locally because it really makes you want to keep going back. Those are probably the big things.
So, Dr. Raj, I wanted to ask you, I know you were doing some work in India where you basically were trying to make rape in marriage illegal. And I know that it was very hard, and I think it didn't really go through, but I really wanted to know what are you doing right now to fight back and make that happen, or what's something that we can do to help, push back that barrier and help this go through.
So just to one clarification. So rape is illegal in India, but marital rape.
Sorry.
No. You're right. It's a nuanced difference, but an important one. So that form of sexual violence in penetration, that is forced penetration, that is absolutely illegal. However, if it is your husband, it doesn't qualify under the rape law. It can qualify under the domestic violence law, but many of us are concerned that by not recognizing it under the rape law, you're basically, perhaps unintentionally, suggesting that rape can't happen in marriage. Now, I am enough older than you, quite a bit older than you. So that actually was the case in states in the United States as well in the 90s. And we just have to keep pushing. You just have to keep pushing. I'm not as much of a policy scholar as I am I do more of the epidemiologic study. So what we try to do is just really highlight what are the health and social impacts of this. We try to bring recognition to the fact that most of these types of forced penetration are happening in the context of marriage, not outside of marriage. So by negating that, you're really actually under recognizing the scope and scale of the problem. We also know so in the 2007 data, about 1%, less than 1% of people who had any form of violence, women who had any form of sexual physical violence, reported to the police. Now we've got it up to a whopping 2%. So we try. So on one hand, it's really interesting, and I think it's an interesting study not just for India but in the U.S. We know that most people don't go to criminal justice services. We know that a lot of people who have these experiences, they want to disclose, they want to have support, they certainly want it to stop. They want to feel safe. but they're not necessarily ready to take it into the criminal justice system. And from our perspective, we have to respect the decision. Let whoever has had this happen to them, a choice was already being taken from them. I don't believe they need to have other choices taken from them. So it's kind of a complicated thing to talk about what do we want to do? I think I have moved, and while, I definitely feel aligned with the idea that we need to recognize these kinds of crimes as crimes. At the same time, I think that relying on the criminal justice system to have impact, I just don't believe that that's a solution that will have like broad effects. So I really think we need to have, it really is going to require societal change. It's going to require societal change. And I'm so appreciative with your honesty of saying, oh, there's jokes and stuff. That's the kind of stuff like, jokes, if you're not going to joke about, and some people do, but if you're not going to joke about genocide, if you're not going to joke about, cold-blooded murder, I would say this is one like we need to move into that realm. So I think that the societal change is definitely happening. I also think that there's a lot of confusion. I think a lot about this with college students. What's okay and what's not okay for many. This is a time when your sexual activity is starting, or there's a greater closeness with a sexual activity, maybe your first relationship. And so kind of knowing that, I think one of the key pieces is just really that communication is so important. Being able to say no, being able to say not right now, being able to say, I don't think so, I'm not sure, but let's maybe not do it at this moment since I'm not sure, having these gradients. And certainly at the moment you are being sexually harassed on the street, and being able, because we just head down, when it was me, head down, walk as fast as you can. Being able to turn to someone and say, that is wrong, stop it. Something along those lines that, my daughter had an experience when she was in 9th grade, and she's in La Jolla. She was walking from La Jolla High School to the La Jolla Library. Not exactly a neighborhood where I had any thoughts of any risk to her. There was a group of boys who bothered her, who, I think said things like nice hips in that, really clever way one does, and it was a group of boys, and after that, she never walked to the library. So when one moment that they probably didn't remember, she stopped walking in the library. I think it's time for boys to start understanding what they're doing. I don't think they know. I also, as much as I had to talk with her, she felt gross and shamed, and like, what was she wearing? By the way, she was wearing her Harry Potter t-shirt and jeans. Just, it has nothing to do. She could have been wearing a short skirt. She could have been wearing Harry Potter t-shirt. It didn't matter. It's not what you're doing, but it's hard to not feel like it was what you did, as you yourself said, Scarlett. But the bottom line is, it wasn't even for you. Those guys were doing that for each other. It really, you were just a pawn in their stupid way of socializing. And I think in every group of boys where that happens, there's always at least one boy who's like, I don't like this, but I'm not going to say anything, and I'll go, huh, to make it feel like I'm there. But it's the most, because I don't want to feel uncomfortable. We got to get more boys to be like, yeah, it's stupid, stop it, and that to be the cool thing. And I say this as the mother of a boy who definitely, I'm sure, has been one of the not saying stuff when people said something stupid. Nobody, I think that, one of the big things with boys is also, I think a lot of them don't know. They just don't know. So communication, I think, is really important, and education is really important, and hearing from boys, and maybe not, in the moment you're so angry as a girl, like it's probably good to get educated before you have the person turn on you with that level of anger, because it makes people defensive. And I'm not saying you don't have every right to be angry, but that defensiveness never feels very good as a response to your anger. It's so frustrating. So So yeah, like early education, speaking your mind and respecting the no's and having internal voices with these when these events occur from their own peers to be like, hey man, yuck.
Not cool.
Not cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a similar experience where I actually had to have a guy walk me. He was my friend, but I had to have him walk me because I didn't feel safe to walk by myself, not even with a group of girls, because I was like, nope. So it just,
and how limiting.
Yeah, like, it's like, why am I depending on a man that, like, you know, it's just, I should feel safe. And it wasn't anything that I did wrong or anything, but I just, you know, I took it upon myself, like it was probably my fault or something that I wasn't walking alone, you know?
Yeah. So my daughter did that with her brother. And I want you to bear in mind that, you know how boys and girls, like they grow at very different times. So my daughter was in 9th grade. She had reached her full whopping capacity of 5'2". And her brother maybe was 4'8". He was in 6th grade. And so she would make him walk with her if she really had to go to the library. And like, let's just take a moment about that. The worst part about that entire thing is it probably worked. Come on, guys.
Yeah.
It's a really powerful message, like to know all these things, but I have to think, like, there are people who's going to be defensive. They're going to be like they don't really get why it's important. Like, what's your advice or like any suggestions on like how to, you know, foster the discussion or like how to make them think differently? Because like there are people who will listen, but there are people who will be like, no, like this is what I think. Like, how do you talk to these people?
Oh, Jinho, that's like the biggest, in this political climate, that is the biggest question we all want to have an answer to. I definitely feel that anger and blaming and name calling is like, and it's so instinctive. It's just not, it's not useful. And I also think that trusted voices within groups are often the ones that need to be giving voice. And so that's really important. I think it's giving strength to, you know, I think about it with sexual harassment, because oftentimes it's a group of boys together. And I often think it may be the minority. There's probably one that's not okay with it. We think this about gang rapes as well, right? And the problem is the loudest, strongest voices in these contexts are the ones who gain control. And the smallest voices are the ones that don't have it. So I don't have a solution, but I've been wondering a lot about how we can take those people, because they're the ones whose ears we can bend, who are in there, and support their strength and positioning to give voice to these ideas. Because we're not, again, it's not about changing culture, it's about stopping harm.
Yeah,
I agree. It just takes one sentence. Like, it's not have to be like a full essay, like why I think it is wrong. It's like just say, hey, stop it, and like they'll be like, okay, and then like they'll just move on, because it was they didn't really realize it's something that they should be discomforted,
embarrassed by.
And just pointing that out, they'll be like, oh, okay. Then,
I mean, if you have a title for this episode, or at some point you want to do another episode specifically on this, may we use Jinho's statement, not cool, man. Like, that is just, it is right on target. Like, the tone, the sentiment, it's just like right there where it's supposed to be.
And I feel like that's a very powerful thing, because you know, when you're in high school, or like middle school, you're trying to be cool. So as soon as someone says, oh, not cool, you're just like, yeah. True, you know? That's like the automatic shutdown. So I feel like it's more so we need to empower that statement of not cool, so that it can help people realize that it is not okay.
Yeah. And I think, again, people from within. So when I think about a group of guys, definitely another guy. Jinho, you got a lot of work to do for us, please.
Yes, I do. I do.
So I do have some questions that like students from this organization had. And one of them was, how can we address health literacy of sexual and women's health amongst women in vulnerable populations? How do we educate these people?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that that question be shared with our campus services, because and that we get some more insight from the students about the nature of the education that's wanted. Too often, I think our educational materials are based, they come from kind of on high and are designed to meet the needs of a very diverse settings, geographic areas, different populations that are attending a given school. And so I think it's going to be really important that I'd love to see the students come together with the services on campus to really vet the educational materials that they have, because if this is how this student is feeling, then perhaps these educational materials they're either not meeting the need, or they're not getting into the hands of people in a way that is meaningful. So that's my thought. And I would say I put that back into the hands of your organization and your students and our local care facility.
Thank you. And then there was another question where, what are some unconscious ways that we hold the patriarchal belief, and what can we do to unlearn these behaviors? And what we can do to unlearn these behaviors.
Unlearn these behaviors. Okay. This is a really hard question. I think there are numerous ways we do that. And because they're unconscious, I have probably done them in the course of this conversation without knowing it. I think that I have moved to a place where, for me, because I can, and I think everybody has to think about what this is for them, but I think it's when those unconscious biases cause harm to me or others, other people I see, then it is and I see the pattern of it, then I will try to tackle that issue, because tearing down the patriarchy, you guys have more vitality than I do now. I'm 50. So I'm probably working on it piece by piece and not in a revolutionary way. And I think people have to make their decisions about that. Do you want to do it in a revolutionary way? And to be honest with you in that, I don't think I am. I think there are better people on campus that can speak to that than me. But in terms of trying to alter patriarchally based harms, what I often try to do is, and I do it as a researcher, is just look for those patterns. I really appreciate the opportunity that I can look for those patterns across national settings, across populations, so that we can see, like, okay, this one is really big. So one example of that is unfair distribution of household labor. That, especially under the pandemic, where many of us have called these gender regressive policies under the pandemic, because by having the children at home and not at school, and having school online, and more people being in the home all day, you're basically increasing domestic labor and educational responsibilities for the household. Oftentimes even more than what would otherwise be there, because what many families are doing is they're not, people that are living on their own, maybe in the city, or they're coming back home. So the household is growing. And even if there is an increase in taking some of those responsibilities across all members in the household, what we're finding is that level of increase in burden is always consistently greater for the women in the household. So that's been a pattern that we've been trying to really think about and tackle. So it's very specific, and that's how I tend to approach it. But everybody has to find their way.
I think like data gives us power, in a sense that politicians use data to support their argument to make these policy changes. And I think you're really instrumental in giving them a groundwork to work on, to say like, hey, we have a problem right here, let's address it. So they can, it'll be their creative thinking skills to address it in a nice manner.
Thank you. Thank you, Jinho. We believe that we are part of supporting data-driven decision-making. So thank you. That is exactly our goal in our work.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of my cousins with their kids trying to work remotely and also attend to their toddlers or children, and also it's hard for them to manage it. So I think it is very important to address it and to be able to see what ways we can do to help and change it.
Yes.
Yeah. Dr. Raj, I'm sorry, we have taken a long time.
It was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. Jinho, you were so patient and sweet. And I guess Scarlett, you were as well, but I didn't even know it. You were just, you know, I cannot tell you, it's a hard time in my life, but like seeing your faces and hearing your voices and learning what you're thinking and what you're doing, like I'm kind of getting a little weepy. It's like, yeah, this is why my dad was like, being a professor is such an amazing job. It's really very special to see students like changing the world and using their skills in these ways. So thank you.
Thank you for taking your time. And like, I know it has been a hard month, but we really appreciate your time.
Yeah. I ask one thing for people that are with me, because I know people feel sad when they know that I'm sad. And so there is something that you both can do for me, which is call your parents. If you don't like your parents, which you're entitled to not like your parents, I don't know them. But if you don't like your parents, call someone who loves you and takes care of you and tell them you appreciate it.
Yes. We like those supporting members around us are like what makes us go forward and then do all these adventurous things as a student.
Yeah. And then let us also know when you get the scholarship up and running so that we can kind of spread the word.
Oh my gosh, no, I can do that now.
Perfect.
Oh my goodness. Well, so this is the deal. There's still donations, but you guys can look for it. And anybody who wants to, like, if you want to donate $1, I don't care. But it's a oh shit. Here. Nope, that's not it. I gotta go to Facebook. I don't even like social media, but once you're in,
you get sucked in.
I mean, this is the way people do things. And so now I'm just stuck. Where's my Facebook? Did my son?
Is it not on the bookmark tab?
So, no, I found it. So just so you know, like, this is how you know you're a good parent, because your parents are like, and so I think I'm a good parent because I realize now how much I took my parents for granted. I mean, I realized it at about 30, because the world revolved around me, and that was really like, that seemed right. You know, my parents should take care of me. They should drop everything for me because I'm their baby. Let me actually, I'll show you the picture really fast.
So for the sake of the podcast, I'll just have you reintroduce your what you're doing and why, and then the information, if that's okay, Dr. Raj.
Totally. But I don't need to do any, I mean, I'm just proud of this, but the main thing I want to show you guys is, I really want to show you this picture because I think you guys will be tickled by it. Remember, I'm a lot older than you. This is the thing, and then the here. So I don't know if you can see it. Can you see it?
Yeah,
we can see this photo. Yeah.
So if you look really carefully, this was in about 1959, 1960, and this is in India. Look at the way you take your diploma. Look at like the way you literally bow down to accept your diploma, and they had it was like a radio show because it was such a big deal. People didn't get PhDs back in the day, so you can see Chicago radio. They did it. Yeah, it's a pretty fun thing. Yeah, Scarlett, I'm so tickled that you're a first gen. I am like so not a first gen. I'm not even first gen PhD. I'm like
close.
Are you Jinho? Are you first gen America? No, you're still like an American.
No, actually, I came to the U.S. at age of 18, and I'm the only one here. My family's all in South Korea.
Oh my God! See, my daddy did that, but he was like 30 with babies, which was terrible. And then I would just like you to know that they had a boy and a girl, and they were really happy. And, they didn't have a lot of money. And then I showed up, and I was not of interest. My mom was doing her master's degree, and they were like, oh, well, look at that. All right. Well, you guys are the sweetest. Thank you so much. Thank you for letting me share a picture of my dad. It means a lot to me.
We'll definitely share a word about this scholarship. It's really, if we click on the link, probably there's more descriptions about it.
Surrounding yourself with those who support your endeavors is what helps you overcome adversity in life. Whether it's your parents or your loved ones, give them a call and say thank you. I know it may be awkward, but I'm sure they will appreciate it. In some instances, family members and friends are those who make your life more difficult. If you're looking for professional help, Dr. Raj sent us great resources, not only for UCSD students and San Diegans, but also for our listeners around the country. We want to say that we're here for you and love y'all. You're doing great, and we're happy to have you as a listener. Please tune in for our next episode featuring California Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez. Until then, hasta luego. Hearing Her Voice is brought to you by the Women's March San Diego at UCSD. The podcast is written and produced by Scarlett Lopez and Jinho Jung. Thank you, Dr. Anita Raj, for taking your time to chat with us today. Our design director is Melisa Wang. Our creative director is Suri Insunza, and our technical director is Catherine Cordova. To learn more about Women's March San Diego at UCSD, please visit our website on Linktree. Subscribe to Hearing Her Voice on Anchor app or wherever you listen to podcasts.